And are we good? Are we live?
They'll tell you, Derek.
We are live, sir.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I want to welcome all those from India and around the world. I am Dr. Garrett Lindquist. I am the Vice Dean of the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling. And it gives me really great pleasure to welcome everyone tonight for our inaugural, that is number one, the first commencement lecture. So tonight, of course, we're coming to you online, that is virtually, and for a good reason. You know, the last 18 months, when future historians look back on this time, there's no doubt that this will be known as the era of COVID-19. And so the virus has really had both tragic and disruptive consequences worldwide, both at the level of the individual, economic, society, and so forth. So it has also, on the other hand, it's led to this sort of reaffirmation and this elevation of the importance of psychology. So we need people that have a real specialized understanding of mental health and mental illness. And so as a part of this, there is a growing recognition in India and abroad that we really have a need, a demand for young people to come into higher education and study psychology. So for instance, over the last, again, 18, 20 minutes, we know that both depression and anxiety, their incidence has almost doubled worldwide. The quarantine has led to social anxiety, right? Think of the quarantine when people were locked inside. So you were shut off from your friends and family. And today, fortunately, things are getting better. We're beginning to reemerge. But even still, as we begin to sort of return to this normalization, there may be anxiety on the part of some as they begin to interact with others, right? You're no longer allowed to work from home. So the point is that there's really a need, and a crucial need at that, for mental health care around the world. And I think this is especially true in India, where there's a dearth of psychologists and mental health professionals. And there's this lingering stigma that is often associated with mental illness. So tonight is really about looking forward. And I'm very happy to have everyone with us. So I'd like to share a quote with you. This is from the American author, Dennis Waitley. And I think it applies to everyone, but especially to those new students. And I do want to make a special acknowledgement to our new batch of students for JSPC. So here's the quote: learn from the past, set vivid, detailed goals for the future, and live in the only moment of time over which you have any control, now. Right? When we first started planning this school, the expectation, the hope was that we would all be on campus, but unfortunately, that's not the case. But as we look forward, we have hopes, we have expectation that things will improve. Hopefully, we'll all be able to get together soon. And so with that said, I want to welcome everyone, all of our speakers tonight. We really have a prestigious group. And so to start us off, I want to welcome our esteemed Vice Chancellor, Professor Raj Kumar.
Thank you very much, Derek. And it is such a pleasure to be here on this very special occasion as we celebrate and mark the occasion of the beginning of and indeed the commencement of a new school, a new program, a new set of students who will form the first cohort of a new undergraduate program in psychology. I want to first of all take this moment to thank our esteemed chief guest, Professor Vikram Patel, who is the Pershing Square Professor of Global Health at the Harvard Medical School, who will of course be formally introduced shortly, but I want to extend my deep appreciation for Dr. Patel to have taken time out of his busy schedule to deliver the commencement lecture. There are very few people in the world who are more suitable to speak on this theme than Dr. Patel, and we are truly grateful to him for his presence and his participation in this event. For all the students who are joining us and also your parents and others, this is a very special moment for you. I am conscious of that. Heartiest congratulations that you have all completed your high school studies in a rather uncertain environment. You took the 12th standard examination, completed that for the last Over a year, you have been online, and from March 2020, you have hardly taken a vacation, and here you are. You took the entrance examination again to join a university, and now you have joined the university, and on Monday you will begin your first classes. So it's not it's a very, very what we call extraordinary act of courage and conviction and resilience that each one of you have demonstrated to be part of the program and joining the school. You're also a very special bunch of people because you're you are part of the pioneering batch of the Bachelor of Arts Honors in Psychology course. And I can only think about the day when we started the university. As some of you know, we are a multidisciplinary university. We started in a very modest manner with only 100 students when we launched and inaugurated the Jindal Global Law School in the year 2009, and with only 10 faculty members. And in the last 12 years, as a university, we have grown significantly. With today, we have 12 different schools, a law school, a business school, a school of international affairs, a school of public policy, a school of liberal arts and humanities, a school of journalism and communication, a school of art and architecture, a school of banking and finance, a school of environment and sustainability, of course, the 10th school, the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling. And then we have just launched 2 more schools, both of which will begin its academic session in 2022, the Jindal School of Literature and Languages and the Jindal School of Public Health and Human Development. I mentioned all these things primarily to bring a very important point as far as the vision of the university is concerned. We deeply believe in the idea of interdisciplinarity. These schools whose names mentioned and programs that they offer are part of an opportunity that is given to every student at JGU to take courses across all these schools. Every day after 5 p.m. in the evening, we offer over 550 courses that are available as cross-listed courses for every student, regardless of which school or program that you are part of. And this is an extraordinary opportunity that Jindal students have, which puts them in an enviable position. I also want to mention that the school is deeply committed to internationalization, including the kind of opportunities that are available for students to pursue student exchange programs, dual degree programs, short-term study abroad programs, and many other things. In addition to that, the university has been advancing a very strong research agenda. The precursor to the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling has been a truly world-class research institute in the name of the Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences, led by one of our distinguished scholars, Dr. Sanjeev P. Sani, who will be joining us shortly, and of course, Manjushri, who is present here, and many others who are part of that effort. We have had many students across different schools part of various research projects and research initiatives under the JIBS, and many of them will continue that work even within the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling. Lastly, I want to say that studying psychology at this time in India adds a very specific meaning to it, given the fact that we are familiar that there has been widespread neglect both within the government, but also in the larger society on issues relating to mental health. Our own university has been at the forefront in advancing some of these causes, including the work that the JIPS has been undertaking with regard to counseling and capacity building in schools across the country, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. I can only hope that the next generation of practitioners and scholars who will be part of the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling, who are going to study the BA Psychology Honours, hopefully will end up pursuing higher studies in some of these disciplines and contribute the woefully inadequate number of professionals who are working in this field. With those words, once again, I want to congratulate all these students who are joining the BA Psychology Honours. I also want to extend a warm welcome to the new faculty members who are also joining the university as a part of the inaugural team of the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling. I want to particularly pay special tribute to Derek and Manjushri and Kanika and many others who have been part of this effort to put together this program. I can't wait to hear Dr. Vikram Patel as a part of the commencement lecture. Thank you very much and wish you the very best.
Fantastic. Thank you, Professor Raj. So next up, we have Dr. Kanika Malik. She is an assistant professor in the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling, and she will introduce our commencement speaker.
Thank you, Derek. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you to Dr. Vikram Patel. Dr. Patel is the Pershing Square Professor of Global Health at Harvard Medical School and a Wellcome Trust Principal Research Fellow. In his career spanning over 3 decades, Vikram has added many feathers to his hat. He has co-led more than 50 national and international projects, focusing on addressing the burden of mental health problems, specifically in the social disadvantaged communities, and strengthening the use of community resources for prevention and treatment of mental health problems. He is the co-founder of Movement for Global Mental Health at Harvard, the Center for Global Mental Health at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, the Mental Health Innovation Network, and Sangat, a not-for-profit in India. He has served on various commissions, including the India's first National Mental Health Policy Commission, as well as WHO High-Level Independent Commission for NCDs. He has chaired multiple Lancet Commissions, including Citizen Commission on Reimagining India's Health System, Adolescent Health and Wellbeing, Clinical Commission on Depression. He has served as advisors to various national and international organizations, including that of WHO, UNICEF, UNPF, George Institute, World Psychiatry Association, as well as Ministry of Health and Family Welfare and National Human Rights Commission. He has mentored various graduates, postgraduate doctorates in his career, and I was fortunate enough to be mentored by him during my postdoc work. He has been conferred with multiple awards, including the Chalmers Medal, the Sarnet Prize, the Pardes Humanitarian Prize, an honorary OBE, and a Gardner Award in Global Health. He was listed in Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential Person in the year 2015, along with Barack Obama, Kim Kardashian, and Kanye West. Thank you, Vikram, for joining us for the commencement ceremony. I will now hand over the mic to you to address our audience.
Thank you very much to the Vice Chancellor, to the Dean of the school, and Kanika for your kind introduction. Greetings to all of you from Boston. I want to thank and congratulate, first of all, the Jindal University for launching its School of Psychology and Counseling, and in particular for inviting me to deliver this lecture, this commencement lecture to the first batch of students of psychology. And I speak now directly to those students. Today, you're embarking on a really exciting journey. I look back at my own life and I remember the first day I joined, my very first day in college, which was in the St. Xavier's College. Those were the days when you had a 10+2 system where you did 10 years in school and then you did 2 years in a junior college, as it was called then. And it was easily the most exciting, the most transformative, the most momentous occasion of my life. And I want to congratulate each and every one of you for having made this amazing journey across school and for having secured admission in this wonderful new School of Psychology and Counseling. As the Vice Chancellor rightly said, you're also embarking on a journey to learn what I consider is one of the most important of all subjects of higher education. No doubt, many of you are already very aware of why I refer to the subject of psychology as important as it is. For if we really think about this, is there anything that is more important to humanity than our mental health? Let's first of all remind ourselves that mental health is much more than mental illness. One of the great problems with all conversations on mental health is that it gets reduced to a biomedical, narrow entity of sickness. But actually, mental health is much more than that. Let me actually tell you what the World Health Organization defines as mental health to illustrate how broad and how important mental health is to each and every one of us. Mental health is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Let's pause and think about the expanse of this definition. And if you imagine all of these characteristics as being part of our mental health, I go back to what I said earlier. Is there anything that is more important to us as individuals, as humanity, than our own mental health. If psychology is at its very heart the discipline which seeks to understand the human mind and behavior in all its various facets, to help us understand what makes us who we are as human beings, and to help devise ways in which we can live happier, more fulfilling, and better lives, then surely psychology is the most important discipline for all of humanity. And even today, here is the paradox. We know more about the surface of the moon than we know about the innermost workings of our own brains. We know even less about how our brains interact with our social worlds to shape our minds and our behavior. And therefore, not only is psychology, in my mind, the most important discipline, it is also the most fascinating one, with so much that we don't know, and therefore so much that is left to learn and discover. And I hope that some of you, at least, will find the scientific endeavors at the heart of discovery, at the heart of psychological science, careers that you might find yourself pursuing as you go forward in life. Of course, many of you will also be interested in the applied elements of psychology, and I'll be talking to that in a moment. Now, as you embark on this journey, I think Dr. Derek mentioned this, we're really at one of the most pivotal moments of the history of India and indeed the world. And it's pivotal because I don't think I have ever seen in my own career, Kanika mentioned that I have been working in this area for 3 decades. I don't believe I can recall any point in the last 3 decades when mental health has been so much in the foreground of public conversation and public policy. Indeed, I'd say mental health has never been as important as now. In fact, when you consider the conversations around the pandemic, and of course, there's been so much more conversation about public health, think about what happens in our news, and you will realize that second only to the virus, you will hear and read conversations about mental health. In India and in many other countries around the world, there is a very good reason as to why mental health has reached such a high level of public visibility. To be blunt, I think we have just witnessed perhaps the most significant humanitarian crisis that have affected our people since the partition, as hundreds of millions of people, indeed, I'd say pretty much the entire population of more than 1 billion people have been affected in very, very serious ways by the COVID-19 pandemic, in particular, the second wave, but also I would say across the last 18 months. Now, a word that you will frequently hear about over the course of your studies in psychology, it'll come up repeatedly, is the word trauma. Trauma means many different things to many different people and can take many different shapes. But for me, at its very heart, trauma is characterized by the toxic effects on the human mind of extreme fear, uncertainty, insecurity, helplessness, and grief. And if you think of all of these different experiences, you will realize that it is trauma that has affected our communities, as millions of stories of suffering, despair, and death vividly communicated to us through the television and the media more generally, twinned with a profound helplessness. I remember my own family's experience in New Delhi, using WhatsApp group to try and find oxygen and actually witnessing people dying simply because there wasn't enough supply of oxygen. How terrifying and how helpless people felt at that time. You can imagine the impact of that kind of terror percolating into the consciousness of every person. It isn't surprising then that we hear so much about mental health distress at these times. And inevitably, as there's an increase in the overall population prevalence of this distress, we will also see an increase in clinically significant mental health problems. But let me tell you what really worries me, and something that you as students of psychology will need to confront and address in the years ahead. It is the longer-term impacts of the pandemic. Of course, we're right in the midst of the pandemic right now, but there will be significant long-term consequences that need to be identified so that we can take actions to reduce their harmful effects. Those effects will include the economic recession, the widening of inequalities that already existed in India, the continuing uncertainties about future waves of the epidemic, the physical distancing policies that the dean spoke to and the impact that's having on all our lives. And for me, as someone who's spent a lot of time thinking about children's well-being, the monumental impact of being out of school for more than a year for millions, tens of millions of children. The long-term impact of this loss of learning is, in my mind, incalculable and will only become evident in the years ahead. Let us not forget for a moment that our minds are in a constant dance with our social worlds. This is why there is a well-established association between a range of social disadvantages, unemployment, impoverishment, lack of education, gender-based violence, indeed any kind of violence, which all have been made worse by the epidemic. There is a strong literature demonstrating how all of these social disadvantages are associated with poor mental health. As I mentioned earlier, there has also been a widening of inequalities. And let us all be aware and conscious that we cannot study psychology without always being aware of these inequalities in our society. These inequalities effectively mean that subgroups in our communities are disproportionately affected by a range of other factors, including the pandemic. And these subgroups who have been historically disadvantaged in our country include women, low-income groups, and of course, persons who already experience mental health. In addition, I would add a very important subgroup, and that is every single student in your class, young people. Young people have been historically ignored in our public health systems. They have been historically ignored in our public policies. And we can see the impact of this historic neglect on how we so readily closed schools and colleges during the pandemic without really spending a moment thinking about the impact this would have on the well-being of children and young people. In my own home state, which is Goa, it is incredible that we are witnessing the opening of casinos even before schools and colleges reopened. And this gives you a sense, really, that in spite of all the speak that we hear in India about the importance of our children and our young people, how much importance we really give to their practical lives. And of course, a key element of their practical lives is being back in college. I hope very much that the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling will reopen as soon as is feasible and safe. In my own school here in Harvard, as we also are struggling with I don't know which wave, I've lost count of the number of waves now, but as the Delta variant begins to affect again populations here in the US, the medical school, the Chan School of Public Health, indeed the whole university has spent a lot of time thinking about our plans to reopen in-person education in the semester that will begin actually in a few weeks. And we've taken the decision to reopen safely. And that is the most important tactic to adopt. How we can reopen in-person education without in any way compromising or jeopardizing the health and well-being of the students, the teaching community, and the non-teaching community that have to cohabit universities. All of these are extremely urgent questions for the field of psychology. And I want each and every student of psychology to go beyond the books, beyond the theoretical curriculum, and to constantly ask questions about the relevance of what you're learning in the classroom to the world around you, to your families, to your neighborhood, to our country. So the need for psychology, and therefore the need for mental health, is great and rising. And yet the fact remains that mental health care systems in India, indeed as in many other countries, were underperforming and broken in most parts of the country. The pandemic has fueled the need for mental health care, and we will need to reimagine mental health care if we are to make a difference. Business as usual was a failure even before. Let me give you an example of how much a failure it was. The government of India a few years ago published the largest survey of the state of mental health in India. I served on the technical advisory group, and the findings were shocking. About 10% of the individuals who were surveyed, more than 30,000 individuals were surveyed, all adults, about 10% suffered from a diagnosable mental disorder. And I'll turn back to this issue about diagnosis, because I think we shouldn't be limited by diagnosis when we think about mental health problems. But even this narrow definition meant that more than 100 million people in India were living with a mental disorder at the time of the survey. But what is even more shocking was that over 90% of these individuals had neither sought or received any form of care from the health system for their problem, making this, in my mind, the largest unmet need for care for any health condition in the country. Now, the pandemic has already fueled a greater demand for mental health care for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, but the system was already completely inadequate even before the pandemic. And this is why I say that business as usual will not work and will be completely inadequate, and which is why we need to reimagine mental health. Now, how do we reimagine mental health? I want to start by saying we know how. And we know how built around three guiding principles and the actions that need to take, that emerge from that, much of which, in fact, has emerged from India. Let me now spend the rest of my talk to tell you about the promise with optimism about what can and should be done. And I hope very much that the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling will be a leading partner in that process, and that you, as students of psychology, will be the army that will make this happen. The first of the three principles, and I've talked about this earlier, is that mental health must not be conflated with narrowly defined categories of mental disorder. This means, practically, that when our mental health is adversely affected, we must support people regardless of whether they have a diagnosis or not. But equally, that when we have a mental health problem, the automatic conclusion must not be that we need to see a medical professional, or indeed even a health professional, for care. That virtually everyone and anyone in the community must be equipped with the skills to promote mental health and to help people who are suffering from difficulties to get better, to recover. To do this, to realize this aspiration, we must expand our approach to the ideas of mental health care well beyond the biomedical model. Second, we must embrace the science, and I have mentioned earlier, I hope that at least some of you pursue a scientific trajectory, which clearly shows that there is a unique interaction between our genes, our early life experiences, especially in the first 15 to 20 years of life, including the life course stage that all of you students are in right now, our physical health and well-being, and what's going on in our lives right now. All of these factors interact with each other to influence our mental health. In other words, our mental health is a product of a convergence of these diverse factors, which are unique to our own life stories. And what does this mean? A one-size-fits-all does not work in the realm of mental health. For example, it might work for COVID-19. In COVID-19, we can have these guidelines that can clearly say, this is what you do for people who are asymptomatic, this is what you do for people who are symptomatic but not severely ill, etc. But I'm afraid that this narrow reductionist view does not work as well for mental health care, because our mental health is a product of so many unique factors that are unique to our own personal story. Third, a rights-based approach is essential. A rights-based approach means that we enshrine the rights to protection, the right to care, and the right to freedom around all our conceptualizations of mental health care, so that ultimately mental health care is completely free of any form of coercion and violence. And I say this because, in fact, there is a lot of discrimination, as I'm sure each and every one of you is aware, attached to mental illness and mental health care. And the reason there is a lot of discrimination and stigma attached to mental health is actually because of the history of violence and the loss of freedom that is often associated with mental illness, for example, being incarcerated in a mental hospital. So how do we apply these high-level principles to the pandemic? Let's start with the acute humanitarian crisis, which I believe we're still in the middle of in India right now. We're not completely out of the woods, even with the second wave. And while we wait for our population to be fully vaccinated, we are still actually at risk. Although I think the risk is lower and lower with time because of the numbers of people who are being vaccinated, we're still at risk of even another wave in the future. I think we need to be prepared to respond now and in the future to the acute humanitarian crises that emerged during the second wave. As I mentioned earlier, trauma is sweeping the country. And for me, this is a form of collective trauma where the entire population, to some degree or the other, has been affected. Mental health difficulties in this context must be seen as a normative response of the human mind to extraordinary circumstances that people have faced. And in this context, mental health care involves not clinical interventions, but prioritizing the basic psychosocial needs of affected communities. What might those include? Adequate food for those daily wage laborers and their families who suddenly found themselves locked out of employment. Life-saving interventions that could be delivered at home because the hospitals were full. Clear information from trusted sources so that the confusion that many ordinary people experience about the mixed information, the misinformation, the conflicting information can be addressed. And promoting self-care strategies for mental health so that everyone in the community knows what to do to help deal with difficult emotional experiences. This will help the majority of people find relief and strength to pick up their lives. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, we need to also recognize that there will be a need for more specific mental health care for people who are experiencing persistent or severe problems. This will afflict a group of people, and I'm afraid that number will keep growing. Now, one of the most important things that I'm sure many of you have noticed during the last year has been the flourishing of novel ways of addressing mental health. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, one of the historic opportunities the pandemic presents is just the greater visibility of mental health. The importance of the human mind has never been more widely acknowledged as now. And alongside that, there's also been an increase in innovative ways of thinking of how to address the rising tide of mental health problems, most notably through telehealth, telemedicine platforms. This is a very exciting and a welcome aspect because it means that now using these platforms in actually identical to what we're doing right now. Honestly, I mean, if the inaugural commencement address had been an in-person event, I'm not so sure I myself would have been able to be with you today. And so you can just see how transformative these remote and virtual platforms have become. And my sense is even if we begin and when we begin in-person education, I still believe that we shouldn't completely reject or outdo the existing wonderful opportunities that virtual platforms also offer. Some kind of hybrid model might be the way to go. And I think this is exactly the same for mental health care, where telehealth has greatly expanded opportunities for access to people in remote or rural areas who would not have access to good quality care. Also, another really important strength of the telemedicine approach has been the recognition of the importance of psychological interventions. Because let's be honest, most mental health care in India, even the little that people do receive, is really synonymous with medication. If you go to the district mental health program of India, you will rarely see a psychologist there. And when the psychologists are there, they are largely doing administrative tasks, or they're doing tasks like, for example, only limiting their skill set to testing. But the actual provision of psychological interventions is very rare across the country. And I think what telemedicine has allowed people to do is to recognize the importance of psychological therapies, because of course, this is the most dominant form of care that one can deliver on a virtual platform. However, there is a limitation. And that limitation, of course, is that telemedicine still requires a skilled provider. And we are desperately short of skilled providers in India. Let me give you an example of how short we are. It is estimated that if I count all the mental health professionals in the country, by mental health professional, I mean clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, and social workers who have specialized training in mental health. and of course nurses who have specialized training in mental health, the number will probably not exceed 10,000. There are more than 10,000 mental health professionals of all these backgrounds of Indian origin who are working in the US. There are more mental health professionals in the city of New York than in the whole of India. And that gives you a sense of what a massive shortfall there is if we use the US or another wealthy country as a benchmark for how many mental health professionals we have. So if we continue to rely on these highly qualified mental health specialists to be or the front line of mental health care, we will never be able to fix the shortfalls in our mental health care system. And so we have to look for other innovations. And for me, the most exciting innovation that has come from India, and this is not just to do with mental health, these are innovations that seek to reach our healthcare system to the last mile, something our public healthcare system should have done, but has failed to do adequately, even though we are about to enter our 75th year of independence, is to offer quality care to the last mile at low cost. And the most singular innovation for healthcare system more generally, but has now been applied to mental health care too, is the use of widely available community-based human resources to deliver frontline mental health care. Well, healthcare more generally to begin with. This movement began several decades ago, and pioneers in our country have demonstrated how community-based health workers can transform Hi, I'm sorry, I might have got disconnected, but I'll continue from where I was just left off when I got disconnected, was about the greatest innovations in my mind that have come from India in the health sector was a demonstration of community-based frontline workers delivering healthcare. This has transformed our health system. And indeed, some of our greatest improvements in health indicators, such as the reduction of maternal mortality and infant mortality, is primarily not because we built very expensive obstetric units around the country, but because we built a community-based workforce. Today, we call that the ASHA, but there are many other community health workers, cadres in India, who mobilize mothers, for example, to seek antenatal care and to deliver their babies in hospital. And the same has been applied to mental health care, and I'll talk about that in a moment. The second very important innovation is the active participation of the community in all aspects of healthcare. Again, I draw my inspiration from the National Health Mission, particularly the National Rural Health Mission. And in the case of mental health, of course, that participation must extend in particular to involve people with a lived experience of mental health problems. These innovations have redefined mental health care in many different ways, in particular by redefining who is a mental health provider and where mental health care should be provided. And ultimately, this is also influencing public policy, both at the national as well as the global level. In doing so, my young friends, we change the narrative from the one we usually hear, which is to say, we don't have enough resources. And by that, we often mean resources that are very expensive, such as mental health specialists, to the narrative of how do we use the resources that every single community in India and globally has, which is people who are interested in the well-being of others and their broader community. How do we leverage those resources in ways which can transform lives? Now, these ways of reimagining health more generally and mental health in more particular has been built on several decades of science spanning very many different disciplines. And I hope that in your course of studies in psychology, you will receive training or have exposure to all of these disciplines, including cognitive and other types of neuroscience, clinical science on mental health problems, public health science on how you achieve equity across the population, the social sciences For example, how you understand people's belief systems around mental health. These are all, each and every one of them, very important. And I was so pleased to hear from the Vice Chancellor that one of the guiding philosophies of the Jindal University, Jindal Global University, is an interdisciplinary approach. In my mind, the only way we will really fully be able to understand the map of the human mind is, in fact, through an interdisciplinary approach. Now, one of the world's leading research organizations that has really sought to work across all of these different disciplines is an Indian one, one that I have been closely associated with since it was founded 25 years ago, Sangat, which has been a pioneer in many aspects of reimagining mental health care. And I want to share with you a remarkable example of how Sangat's work is transforming not only India, but the world. About 20 years ago, along with Sangat, I started researching depression. And I was interested initially to understand, how is depression viewed in the community? How is it addressed by the healthcare system? What are the unmet needs for care for people who have been affected by depression? That work gradually led to the design of interventions that should and can be delivered by non-specialist workers, such as the ASHA, frontline workers, or lay counselors in routine healthcare settings. Over years, we developed a brief psychological treatment based on the principles of behavioral activation. We called it the Healthy Activity Program, and ran one of the largest clinical trials in the world, with nearly 500 individuals with severe depression attending primary health centers, being randomized into receiving this novel intervention delivered by a lay counselor in primary care compared to standard primary health care, and found that the intervention was associated with dramatically increased chances of recovery. I'm really excited to share with you some new findings that are actually not yet published. I only saw them day before yesterday, but I can't resist the urge to share them with you. Along with JPAL, the large Poverty Action Lab group led by Abhijit Banerjee, a good friend and a colleague here in Boston, we followed up these nearly 500 individuals 5 years later to look at the long-term impacts of receiving this brief psychotherapy, and found that 5 years later, you could still detect very strong and substantial signals that reflected recovery rates from depression, which is really quite remarkable. This intervention was subsequently adopted by colleagues in Nepal, Uganda, and Malawi, and our positive findings were replicated. But here is a really, truly remarkable occurrence. This 6-session treatment was subsequently adopted by colleagues in Canada and the US. And the US government funded $14 million to evaluate the impact of this intervention adapted for mothers in the US and Canada. And just very recently, we have received a $10 million prize called the Lone Star Prize to scale up this intervention when adapted for the American context in the state of Texas. Now, here's the interesting thing. This is an intervention designed and developed in India, which is now being exported to the wealthiest countries in the world. I don't think that it's very often that we hear stories about this kind of reverse engineering, low-cost interventions being developed in India and taken to the wealthiest countries of the world. The good news, of course, is that Sangat is also working, of course, extensively in India itself, particularly with state governments in Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat, and of course, Goa, to scale up this intervention using digital platforms. Now, this brings me to something that I'm really excited about, which is about potential to collaborate with the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling, and maybe more broadly with the Jindal Global University. Having discovered this new intervention and now finding that the intervention is very effective, it has long-term benefits, it's been effective in many other populations and contexts, and is now being scaled up in many countries of the world, we decided to invest in the use of technology to scale up. About a year and a half ago, just before the start of the pandemic, we launched a new initiative called Empower. What is Empower seeking to do? It is seeking to use a suite of connected digital technologies, learning technologies, supervision technologies, and quality assurance technologies so that we can train providers, community-based providers, psychologists, and others to learn, deliver, and master these evidence-based brief interventions for the prevention and care of mental health problems. I'm excited, of course, that we're implementing Empower simultaneously in under-resourced contexts, both in India as well as in the US, where Harvard Medical School is playing a lead role, exemplifying really the future of the field of psychology, where knowledge flows freely in both directions, between the wealthy world and the less resourced world. And here, I'm especially excited to share with you, the starting students of psychology in the Jindal School, that the Jindal School and Sangat and Harvard Medical School will hopefully embrace a collaboration, a partnership, to evaluate a digital training program to teach a brief evidence-based psychological treatment for adolescent mental health problems, and which I hope will serve as the foundation for more and diverse partnership between all our institutions. So I'd like to really come to a close now by speaking again directly to you students. As you go forwards in your studies, do so with an open mind to learn. Seek answers to questions, especially the really difficult ones. Do not avoid them, because our field requires us to grapple with, to address the complex questions of humanity. Dream of using psychology in any of its extremely diverse ways. And I hope I've illustrated just a few of them. There are so many more. But ultimately, your goal must be to use your skills and your knowledge to improve humanity, to improve the quality of life and well-being of everyone in India. And you must always remember, equity should be at the forefront of your thinking. We live in a country with unacceptable inequalities. In fact, to me, it is perhaps the most grotesque sign of injustice in our country. And those inequalities are constantly increasing. It is your role as students of psychology to make sure that you wield your discipline to help reduce those inequalities. And as you do so, remember to take time out to care for your own mental health. Because in taking care of your own mental health, you will be a better champion for mental health for everyone around you. There are many different ways in which you should take care of your mental health, but working very closely with my own undergraduate student community here in Harvard, I'd like to share some of the things that we encourage our own students to be involved with. You need to, first of all, be aware of and acknowledge your mental health. And as students of psychology, you need to be ambassadors for mental health for the entire Jindal Global University community. Here at Harvard, we've launched a cross-university initiative called Global Mental Health at Harvard. And one of the key planks of Global Mental Health at Harvard is to generate student ambassadors who can speak for and about mental health, but moreover are willing to be trained in brief interventions, early interventions, frontline interventions, crisis interventions, so that they can become the first line of support to other students in the community who they recognize are suffering from mental health difficulties. I encourage you as the first year of psychology to brainstorm with your faculty on how can you really be the agents of change, not only for the world outside, but for the world within your university. And certainly speaking from my own work here at Harvard, I'd be more than happy to share some of those ideas, some of the initiatives, some of the different ways in which we are engaging the broader Harvard undergraduate community and graduate community within conversations about mental health. Let me just tell you that there is no subject more important to my president, that is to say the president of Harvard University, than the mental health of our student community. And indeed, this is true of campuses across the US, where mental health problems are the single leading cause of sickness reported to the health services within colleges and universities, and the single most important cause for students leaving college. So mental health is a very important subject for colleges, and I'm pretty sure that it will be the same for universities in India. one critical part of this process is to really encourage people to be comfortable sharing one's own stories about mental health, because this is not only a very powerful way to really feel better. I'm sure all of you will recognize when you speak about the way you feel to someone else you trust, how much less of a burden it is for yourself. But it's also an extremely effective way to reduce stigma. Sangat has a wonderful initiative called It's Okay to Talk, which I'd encourage each and every one of you to go to the website and look at that. And there is also a new initiative linked to that called Man Mela, Festival of the Mind, and a whole series of podcasts on pandemic stories, which really communicate stories of young people who have experienced mental health in various shapes and forms, their struggles and their stories of recovery. But above all, this is really a strategy to really bring mental health out into the open, to create a level of comfort so that when people have difficulties with their mental health, they are not ashamed to share that with others around them. I think an important strategy of how one can reach out to others, but also serve oneself, is to remember the science that has shown that community service, the caring for others, not only helps those others that you're caring for, but it also, very importantly, makes your own life more rewarding, more meaningful, more purposeful. Compassion is not just charity, but serves you, in fact, the most. And therefore, being involved in a collective spirit to improve the well-being of everyone in your university will not only powerfully change your university, but also it will change you fundamentally. I also want to say a few things about yourself privately. I would strongly encourage each and every one of you to remember your physical health and well-being is indistinguishable, inseparable from your mental health. Make sure you pay attention to your physical well-being. Go for a walk, swim, engage in sports. You're lucky to be in a great university that will give you opportunities for each of those. Make sure you sleep well. Also, as we heard quite rightly from the dean, this is a brief uncertainty that we're all going through. I am absolutely confident and absolutely sure that we will return to business as usual when it comes to education, as for example, being together again, being together again with your community of peers and your teachers in the very near future. Be hopeful. That is extremely important. Now, I want to end by saying, in caring for your own mental health, you will improve the mental health of others around you. And in paying attention to the mental health of others around you, you will benefit as well. It is a mutually reinforcing symbiotic relationship. In closing, my young friends, the pandemic presents a historic opportunity for us to reimagine the traditional approaches to the way we understand mental health and address mental health. We know how we should do this by scaling up the science which demonstrates the need to recognize mental health as a public good, not just as a biomedical entity. Something that is important to each and every one of us at every single point in our lives. And indeed something that is central to the concept of human capital, a concept that has been promoted by the World Bank as being even more important to the well-being and development of societies than just the narrowly defined economic capital. Mental health, quite simply, is our greatest personal asset. And this is why mental health is everybody's business. And today, I congratulate you and I celebrate the fact that each and every one of you is taking the first steps of a journey to be part of this movement, to embrace the diversity of mental health experiences and actions which can transform and save lives. Good luck to each and every one of you, and thank you very much.
That was great. Thank you very much, Dr. Patel. It's really wonderful to hear about the amazing work that you've done both in the US and India and around the world with regards to mental health care and support. I suspect that there's many students out there in our audience right now that are really excitedly sort of contemplating their future careers in psychology. And I do want to acknowledge that we have had discussions with your organization, Sangha, and I'm almost certain that there will be opportunities for our students to participate in some of these training programs that you discussed. And lastly, I just want to quickly acknowledge that, you know, most of what you went through really does align with the vision and mission of the school, right? It's this idea that psychology is intrinsically important to virtually every aspect of life. And as a school, we really take seriously the idea that we're here to train the next future generations of psychologists, be that those ultimately go into treatment, applied psychology, or research, where we're really trying to understand these basic features of human behavior and all those mental processes that we engage in. So once again, thank you very much. I know you have other obligations, so you'll have to depart, but on behalf of everyone, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Well, Derek, thank you so very much for inviting me. It's a real honor and a privilege to have been part of this inaugural function. I certainly look forward very much to our partnership. Certainly when I return to India in the late fall, at the end of October, I hope very much to get a chance to meet with some of you at JGU. Of course, I'm really excited also about the imminent launch of the School of Public Health and Human Development. And I see a huge amount of potential, synergy actually between the School of Psychology and Public Health, and I'm really always excited to hear this idea of convergence and interdisciplinarity, and look forward very much to our collaboration.
Great.
Dr. Patel, my colleague, Dr. Sani, has just joined us. He was in a class and hence couldn't join before. Dr. Sani, Vikram just gave a fascinating commencement lecture, and
I missed that, Dr. Patel, but I've heard about you, even in US and in India. I'll just take 5-7 minutes because I was teaching a cyber psychology class, and I said that I have to be there because it's all my loss that I could not. What he said, I really liked. Students, welcome to this school and this commencement, and this nobody could have been better than Vikram Patel to address all of you. You know, what he said, I really like. The mental health is the business of everyone. We all know that the pandemic has deprived us in a big way for the physical presence and social connection. And we all know that social learning plays a major role in all of us, and which from the last few months is being deprived. We all know that education should have a component of emotional intelligence, social intelligence, and artificial intelligence, and that is missing right now. And I totally agree with Dr. Patel that no more than ever, well-being matters now, especially. In India, we have why there's so many students are interested taking admission to the school. I could see that one reason everybody's talking about mental health right now. Although we have all tiptoed towards the cautious optimism, people continue to struggle with mental health issues. There's a problem, as I've heard Dr. Patel also mentioned, the stigma attached with the word psychology, and people are not interested visiting. I have seen personally when I have conducted at least over 1,000 programs with school students and teachers, that when we say that probably you need to seek a help from a mental health profession, nobody likes it. And unfortunately, Dr. Patel, we could not develop a standardized test in India so far where we can assess. Like learning difficulty is basically at the remote, forget about the remote areas, even in the bigger towns, we don't have a standardized test, which way we can assess. Even to talk about depression, we all know that, even in India, 17% people are suffering from depression, but we don't have a proper standardized test to assess those kind of things. Some consideration need to be reconsidered, given that the pandemic has sent our collective nervous system into an overdrive. In Jindal Institute of Behavior Sciences, I want to tell you that this is a research institute which was established in 2013, 7 years back, and we do only research in behavioral sciences. And we are kind of a knowledge partner to Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling. And there we have established a brain behavior laboratory also, where we are working on a lie detector test and brain mappings and other thing, where people, and because it is very important that in questionnaires, in fact, that's my personal opinion, that when people fill up these questionnaires, people generally would like to write what they want rather than what they are. So that is one of the reasons. And another thing is that, as I'm sure somebody must have given those kind of statistics, that in India, there is a 0.7 psychologists are available after 1 million. And that also, most of them are teaching are on general psychology. Clinical psychologists are very few in India, and that also they are working in the hospitals. And obviously, whenever somebody is having a little psychological issues, they are not interested going to hospitals. In our school, Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling, I'm sure that this 3 years program will enable them to understand the major issues of mental health, especially in schools, because we conducted many programs in the schools where we found that, whether it's a domestic abuse or inconsistent behavior of parents, whether there is a bullying at home, or that leads to drug addiction and other major issues. And even parents are not being trained properly how to raise their children at home. I don't think none of us in India have got a training how to raise children. Offering extensive targeted mental health supports for staff most vulnerable to vicarious trauma and compassion figure and burnouts. This is what is required right now. People have lost their jobs. People have got a pay cuts, and they are all suffering in a big way. We don't have a proper statistics, but there is a need to reimagine creative, community-led. I'm more interested to talk about community-led solutions of what mental health can look like. In India, we need to do a lot, and I'm sure with research in Jindal Institute of Behavior Sciences, as well as in Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling, together we are going to engage in a community mental health programs in a big way. Just to mention you, Dr. Patel, that Jindal Institute of Behavior Sciences have a JIBS, that is Jindal Institute of Behavior Sciences infotainment series. There are probably 110 videos of 3 to 5 minutes, which are all related to mental health. And within 1.5 years, there is almost 3 million viewers and almost 4 crores of hits onto those channels. And that is helping us quite a lot. We are spreading this awareness, but we need your help. We want to prepare our students for better community, and mental health is basically a complete focus of this university as well. Well, thank you very much, students. And I would love to, whenever we are going to open physically, we would love to have you on campus with us. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Sani. Next up, we have the registrar of the university. So Professor Siradar Patnaik.
Thank you very much, Derek. Good evening, everyone, and good morning to our guest, Dr. Vikram Patel. It's been so fascinating listening to him. Well, I will leave the remarks to all the experts in the room, but I just cannot hide my excitement, and I must say congratulations to all our students belonging to the first ever batch of the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling. And it's certainly a big day. And I would also like to congratulate the school led by its Vice Dean, Derek, and then Associate Dean Manjushri, and all the faculty members. And most importantly, the school that's been set up under the mentorship and guidance of Professor Dr. Sanjeev Sahani. So it's indeed a big day and also a momentous occasion therein, because we are now setting up this particular school just as a logical extension or continuation to our conclusion of the 10th convocation ceremony. And also this school happens to be the 10th school. So all I'm going to say is that, dear students, you will be certainly benefiting not only from the resources within the school, that is the faculty members from within the school. And I also take this opportunity to welcome all the faculty members of the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling. But one of the distinct advantages is that we have 9 other schools, and the 11th school and the 12th school are going to commence their academic operations from the subsequent year. So you'll have a lot to sort of gain from the interdisciplinary approach that we follow at the Jindal Global University, a very important aspect that has been touched upon by the Vice Chancellor, the Chief Guest, and even Dr. Sahani. All I'm going to say is that make sure that you take the fullest advantage of all the learning opportunities that will be provided to you. And I also presume that you had been part of the pre-semester training, general engagement and immersion program, and followed by the university resource orientation that we had conducted yesterday. And if in case you by any chance missed out attending the resource orientation program, the link is available on the YouTube channel of the university. I would request you to log into the link and watch the entire resource orientation program, because it's very important that you know your university and you know all the facilities and the support services that we have at the university, in addition to the academic orientation that you're going to attend. And all these aspects put together, it's going to make your learning more engaging and more enriching. And I also would like to take a moment to say that while I welcome each one of you, please be assured of the fullest support from my office, that is the Office of the Registrar, and the entire university community and all departments. And the most important departments for you in the years to come will be the Office of Career Services and the Office of International Affairs and Global Initiatives. But one of the distinct advantages you'll also have is to benefit from the Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences, set up by Dr. Sani and admirably led by Dr. Sani and his team. And also you will have a lot of traction and to gain from the university psychology and counseling services that we have within our university. So we look forward to not only welcoming you, but also mutually learning from one another as we all sort of make an earnest attempt to drive in awareness about mental health issues and also build capacity on this particular area. Because to me personally speaking, and I'm sure you would agree with me, it's not just only about building a certain capacity, but a positive attitude towards life and society is also a way of life. So on this particular note, I once again congratulate all the incoming students, the faculty members, and the entire university leadership led by the Vice Chancellor and the advisor to the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Sani, on this momentous occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So to complete our evening, it's a real pleasure to introduce my colleague, the Associate Dean, Professor Manjushri Pallet.
Thank you, Derek. Hello, everyone. Good evening. It's my privilege to actually propose the concluding remarks. I am thankful that all of you have joined us today in this commencement, and I want to really thank our esteemed guest speaker, Professor Vikram Patel, for his inspirational talk on reimagining mental health. A very strong foundation, I believe, stands on strong pillars, and for JSPC, these pillars were our Vice Chancellor, Professor Rajkumar, Principal Director, Professor Sahani of Jindal Institute of Behavioral Sciences, our registrar, Professor Patnaik, and last but not the least, our JSPC Vice Dean, Professor Lindquist. These visionary leaders, their determination and their unstinted support and guidance have enabled us to achieve this dream and bring to life the Jindal School of Psychology and Counseling. So as we reach the end of this program and the end of the day, we envision a new dawn full of hope, aspirations, and possibilities for young psychologists like you in India. So together, we are embarking on this new adventure with a dream of making a difference in the world around. We are going to do this by elevating the understanding of mental health, like Dr. Patel mentioned, and improving the discipline of psychology in India and the world by providing quality of education, encouraging discourses of multidisciplinarity, diversity, and providing hands-on training. So JSPC will grow with its faculty and students, and with each milestones, achievement, challenges, and setbacks. We know that we will grow, we will be determined, we will stay on course, and we will learn from our journey to become the best in the field. Like the great Taoist philosopher said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. So welcome to JSPC students and faculty to a world of new possibilities. With this, thank you for participating in this commencement ceremony, and thank you all for attending. Once again, it has been a lovely start, and we are going to achieve a lot of milestones in this journey. Thank you.
Congratulations to all of you. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you, Manjusha. So to conclude, thank you all very much for all the students out there. On behalf of our wonderful group of faculty we have, we look forward to seeing you all the beginning of next week. And thank everyone for joining us. Please take care, stay safe, and good night.
Are we live or no?